welcome to an episode of Life Stories with Marty. I'm Marty here in Melbourne. My special guest today is Lily Arthur. She's the author of the brilliant book, Prisoner of the State. She's also the CEO of Origins Australia, which is about illegal adoption justice. But her story starts back when she was removed at the age of a month short of her 17th birthday, removed from her house by the Queensland Police. But I want to let Lily tell her story. But I want to give a little bit of a trigger warning on this episode, that it might trigger something in somebody's head. So I suggest you switch off. We will be discussing topics which are in Lily's book. So let's cross over to Queensland and we'll talk to Lily. Lily, welcome to the show and thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Marty, and welcome back.
Yes,
welcome into my house.
Yeah, we've had some good chats before you came on the show.
We did, and we brought back a few memories and brought the Irish out in me.
Yeah, and thank God we didn't record them.
Oh no, that would have been very enlightening for some people.
Absolutely.
They could use it against me.
Yeah, and me. Now, Lily, I'm going to start off. We heard your intro and everything. Now, you have an amazing story, and your book, Prisoner of the State, just blows me away. And I was lucky enough to have time and have a few conversations with you, and I got to know you, and I think you're an amazing woman. But we're going to go into that now. Where you started off when it started in 1967, but I want you this is your life story, so I'm going to try be quiet. I'll come in every now and again, but tell the story, what built up to the situation and what brought you forward. So I'm going to hand over the mic to you now, Lily.
Okay, well, I came to Australia as a 9-year-old from England. My father was Irish, been in the war for many years, and then in Palestine. And my mother was an English Jew. They decided that Australia was going to be a very good place for us to come to. Anyway, we landed in Townsville, and spent a couple of years in the bush, and then moved to Brisbane. We were here for 2 years, and my father decided that he couldn't cope with the country, and he left and went back to England, and left my mother here with 9 children under the age of 12. So, she did it pretty tough, but, she held on to us, and we managed to grow up. Anyway, my father decided after 5 years, mind you, it was nearly 5 years, he decided to come back. And my mother had had a relationship with a fellow that she met, and she was going through a divorce. In those days, you had to be separated for 5 years before you could remarry. And it was just before the 5 years that my father came back and decided that he was going to try and kill my stepfather. So anyway, they locked him up in the Bogger Road. He tells his family back home it was the worst jail in Australia. But anyway, after he was locked up, and he got 10 months, and my mother in the meantime decided to sell the house and move to Sydney. But I was going with a young fellow at the time. I was 16. Yeah. And I had a job and everything else like that, and we decided, after I lived in a room for a while, we decided that I was to move into, he had half a house, and I was a month off my 17th birthday, and he was playing his guitar one night, and with another fellow. It was an acoustic guitar, it wasn't very loud, and I was asleep in bed, and I was woken up, and I just saw these 4 brown legs, and I didn't know what was going on, and I was told to get out of bed, and I found out there was 2 policemen standing over the top of me. Anyway, they just walked into our house, And they questioned me for a while, and then they asked me, was I pregnant? And I was just on about 6 weeks. I'd only just found out that I was pregnant.
So you
Anyway,
were
they took
16
me
at the time.
16 and 11 months,
Yeah.
so nearly 17.
Pardon me.
Anyway, they took me into the South Brisbane Watch House, and I was locked up there for the night. And when they took me there, the sergeant behind the desk said to them, "What are you bringing here for?" It was the middle of the night. Anyway, they said, "Oh, it's too late to take her anywhere else." So the sergeant said to them, "Well, you could get hung for bringing her here." Anyway, they took me belt and me jewelry and everything else, and they locked me up in a cell. So I was there all night with the drunks and everything else going on, and I was very, very sick. I was getting morning sickness, and I was shot. I thought I was in a nightmare. I was waiting to wake up. But anyway, I spent the night there, and the morning they took me for the justice of the peace at the children's court, and they asked the police to look for my parents. They'd only just moved to Sydney, and they were in a caravan park. Anyway, in the meantime, they decided that they were going to put me into what they call an industrial school. It was actually a Magdalen laundry, or Magdalen Asylum from the 1800s. Anyway, they put me there, and they gave a week for the police to find my parents. Anyway, they hadn't found my mother and father, stepfather, I should say.
So
By the
just
time I went back.
one second, Lily. Sorry, just for the audience is. So when you're put in there, just give us a little motion. What was that like the first day you arriving there? You thought life was pretty, you know, sweet up to that, looking forward to having a child. And obviously you loved your boyfriend at the time.
Well, it was an absolute nightmare. I just couldn't believe that, you know, why I was taken from I say my home, and he was my boyfriend was frantic. He was wondering why they're taking me away. And they just told me to get into my civvy clothes and whatever, and just took me. It was they put me in this cell. It was horrible. It was actually a prison. With a
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of horrible bed and the toilet and the sink, there, and they had a hatch on the door that they were looking at me on and off all night. And, I couldn't sleep. I was just really, really, really sick. And anyway, I was pretty wretched by the time I went to court the next day. But a week later, they took me back from the home. I mean, when I arrived at the home, they put me up in the top dormitory and locked me up there for a week. I was there, without anybody through the daytime, just looking down from the window, watching the other girls there, coming and going and whatever. And anyway, when I went back to the court the following week, the police hadn't found my mother, and anyway, I was told that I was going to go to Holy Cross at Wooloowin in Brisbane indefinitely. Anyway, it was like when I get there, at the get to the office and everything else like that, they give me a new name. They call me Leanne. So my name became Leanne, and I got the haircut, a bit longish hair, and I got the haircut and handed a white straight shift and, pair of thongs and whatever. And that was it, and taken to the laundry and uh, put to work there. And anyway, I just thought, well, you know, what's I still thought I was in a living nightmare. But I'd found out, I got called down to the office, I don't know, it was a few days later. And my baby's boyfriend had been to the home, and he'd gone to Sydney and got my parents' permission to get married. And they brought me down to the office to sign all the forms. Anyway, I signed all the forms, and I'm waiting and waiting, days, weeks, and months started to go by. and nothing, because they didn't allow me any contact basically with him. So I was more or less, didn't know whether my mother knew what was going on, or I wasn't allowed to contact anyone. And then, like it got to a point where I must have been about 5 or 6 months or something, and I just realized that nobody was going to come to rescue me. Anyway, the 9 months had passed. I hadn't heard anything. There was no news from him. And then my mother, I'd only get an occasional letter from her, and it was always open. They always read the mail, and they read the mail coming in and they read the mail going out. So you really couldn't tell what was going on,
It was
because,
like a prison, Lily, wasn't it?
well, it was a prison. There was bars on the window.
And the laundry that you did, that work, how many hours did you do? And you didn't get paid for that.
I did a full day. We'd work, we'd get up in the morning about 6 o'clock or something, and then we had to do, making our beds, and then, we'd have to go and down before we went to the laundry. We had to go down, and I had to clean the recreation hall. So we had to clean, the convent or the asylum
Yeah.
before we actually went to breakfast, and then we went to breakfast, and then, straight to the laundry. So, if you weren't, that was if you weren't woken up about 5 o'clock in the morning to go to mass, which,
Yeah.
that was regularly, at least 2 to 3 times a week. So anyway, that's how life went on for me. And I was sitting in mass the morning, like I went into labour, and um, I just felt something. And when I looked, there was blood in the front of my uniform. So I had to stand there and, look for the nun. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what that was all about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And all the girls and the unmarried mothers were just looking at me. Anyway, the nun comes and trots me off, and into the office, and then up to an ambulance came along, and they took me off to the Royal Brisbane Hospital. But anyway, I was in labour for about 16 hours, and I ended up giving birth in a very restricted way. They had me tied down on the stirrup. Anyway, they took the baby straight away, and then sort of like I sort of went blacked out, and I spent the next 8 days, more or less in a daze, and uh, I hadn't seen the baby by then. I wasn't allowed to see him. And a woman came along from the children's welfare department, and after, telling me that they were going to keep me locked up till I was 18, which was about 6 months later, uh, and, to have to go through, they're keeping me in foster care till I could prove that I was able to look after him. And that could probably take about 4 or 5 years. So,
Hmm.
the usual emotional blackmail of, if you don't sign these forms, and let him go to a family that's going to look after him and everything else like that. But while I was in the hospital, my son's father found out that I had the baby, and he came to see me, and he told me, that he went back to get the papers, the marriage papers, and the nun wouldn't give them to him. She just said to him, "Oh, you're too young to get married, so, tough luck." Anyway, um, this is,
The
and
fact that he came
I thought,
back, you obviously, he cared as well. But then when you
well,
lost contact, did he lose contact as well?
yeah, I never saw him again until 30 years later.
Wow.
And anyway, he told me what had happened, and that sort of filled in all the questions that I had. But I ended up that afternoon, after they uh, got the consent of me, they sent me packing, and I was back in the laundry that afternoon, folding up the pillowcases. But they never told, never spoke about it. Nobody ever talked about it. And then about 6 weeks later, they said, "Oh, you're going home next week." Anyway, that was it. They put me on a plane. on a plane to Sydney, and then I had to get on with my life. But I ended up getting married and had a pretty miserable time, and I left my well, when the laws changed, I decided to try and find my son. It was in 1990, and he'd put a
You got to go
veto
back a
on.
little bit, Lily, there. So your marriage there, that didn't work out very well.
No, it wasn't a very good situation. It wasn't a very good situation at all.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, I did leave him. I left him, and you know, when the laws changed, my son placed a veto, so I had a bit of a emotional, whatever, mental breakdown, and I ended up leaving the marriage at that point. But later on, I remarried, and you know, I started to get a bit uh, active as a student, and I thought, well, I'll go and have a look at this situation. I haven't addressed it yet, and that's when I went to an adoption support group and found out that what they did to me was illegal. And then I was like, Jesus, I'm going to get these people. When the pieces started to fit together, that everything they did to me was a crime. And that's when I started uh, like actively searching for my son. Anyway, I didn't know what his name was. I'd been told that if I tried to find him, I'd get 2 years jail for trying to
Oh,
contact him, or a fine. And anyway, when I actually found out his first name, it was Tim. We went through about 2 million odd names looking for every Tim on the electoral roll, and then by a series of God-given events, people say it was a gift of God or whatever, an act of God, who knows? But I actually found him by his first name, and anyway, told him the whole miserable story.
no,
And
tell us for my listeners. I'm curious, but how did you find it? What was the first reaction when you after all those years?
well, it's a bit of a convoluted story, because we've taken all these names up to Queensland, that we got from the electoral roll, and then we went through the state archives up there and matched it up with people that would have came on the electoral roll at a particular time when he turned 18. And then we narrowed that down, and then like a friend of mine was going through these microfiche of school admission lists, and we thought there was the whole of Queensland there, but there was only 6 admission books there that was put into the archives. And she came out and she had the name of a boy. His name was Timothy, and he was born on the same day as my son. And then she came back a few minutes later, and she said, "Oh, there's a Tim who was born 10 days that would have been after the birth of my son." And I said, "Well, he's 10 days older than he should be. He was born on the 1st, and she came out with a boy that was born on the 10th." And she said, "Oh, they changed their date of birth, so you won't find them." So anyway, when we got back to her house, she actually rang up the first fellow that was born on the same day as my son, the 1st of September. And he said, no, it wasn't him, but, he wished it was. But he rang me back later, and he said, he said I was going to ask his sister. And anyway, he rang me back later, and he worked in a coal mine, and he told me that the boy that across the road was born on the same day, and his name was Tim as well. One was Timothy, one was Tim.
Oh,
So anyway, he said, I'll ring up my sister and find out, for sure, whatever. And it turned out that, yes, he was adopted. The kid across the road was adopted and was born at the same hospital
my
and on the
God.
same day. So the next morning I went to the electoral roll. I mean, sorry, I went to I went to I went to visit this politician up there because I was wanting an inquiry. And anyway, he was talking about this fellow that was named David, that was a bit of an agitator. He was adopted, and he was wanting all this privacy. And I'd I'd linked up with a friend of mine who was looking for her son, who was named David. But I actually had some media articles with this fellow's name on from 10 years or more ago.
Yeah.
And I said to her, could be him, but anyway, when I finished with this politician, I thought, well, I'll go and look up the electoral roll because I had what I thought was my son's name. And we found out his address wasn't far from my mother. It was in a place called Caboolture, which is about 45 kilometres north of Brisbane. So she was not far, about within a kilometre away. And he was living there as well. And anyway, so I went to his house. I had these journals and I said to his wife, if he's my son, you can give them to him. And, it was a bit of a story about what happened and media articles and the rest of it. And she was just like, how did you find us? And I said, with great difficulty. But anyway, as I was going out the driveway and into the car, he came along. And I just get down. I'm just getting out of here. Anyway, I went back home and it was all night. It was late in the afternoon that I dispatched these journals. All night I was lying there and, and the next morning, because I was at my mother's house, the phone rang and I heard her talking, you answer the phone and she said, oh, yeah, she's here. Hang on just a moment. And then, a voice at the end of the line said to me, I think you can stop looking. I think I'm your son.
Oh,
and then we met an hour later.
Wow.
He was 32 then. And that's how I found him. And then when I got home, I rang up my friend and I said, have a look through those articles, right? Because it was an article about a meeting and a fellow named David was running this meeting. And by the time I came back from meeting my son, she said, that was my son that was in that meeting, 10 years ago, whatever. And that he didn't want any contact with her. So I'd found my son, she found my son with the microfiche and I found her son without their first names to go by. So people say, oh, that was an act of God, and I think, I don't know what it was an act of, but certainly somebody somewhere wanted me to get some justice.
The chances in a normal, but I think it was more you're persistent to find him.
Persistent.
I think I give you credit that I think it's your persistence that made that work, because most people would have, even with the first name, Tim or whatever, they would have given up, but you didn't. And how's your relationship with your son now?
Well, it's 27 years or something since I found him.
They've taken 27 years away from you.
Well, it's actually, if you look at it, it's 58 years this year since, I lost him. But it's, I was red hot and ready to run because I'd well and truly by that point, I'd become a hard-nosed activist. I wanted justice and, really, and I wanted to get it. And what I did was I took the state of Queensland to court in a landmark court case. And, it took me 7 years to get into court. And anyway, we had the hearing and everything else like that. It was a lot of media because it was, as I said, a precedent court case. Yeah. And anyway, the judgment was handed down on the 23rd of December, just before Christmas. And I walked into the courtroom and my son was there at the time. And, we all had to sit there and stand up and, whatever, while the judge read the decision. And he said, in the matter of Arthur versus the state of Queensland, this matter is dismissed. And he said, you can read my judgment after the court case. And so the prosecution, the state, getting to start to talk about costs, right? Cost me $100,000 to get them into court. And the state jumped up, state solicitor jumped up and said, we won't be pursuing costs, Your Honour. But what happened during the court case, right, was they had all these witnesses, like coming through, and they had nurses and social workers, like through the giving evidence, and they all admitted to what they did. They admitted under oath how they were taking the babies from the mothers, hiding them in the hospital, giving them false names, giving them drugs. They admitted to everything that I'd accused them of. Anyway, the thing was, I was told before I went to court that I would be punished by the court for bringing so many heads of damage to the court. But the judgment certainly was punishment. When they went back to the back of the court, they did want to settle with me halfway through the court case, right? Because all this stuff was coming out. But the settlement was from the state that we both walk away and forget about it, and they won't go me for costs. And I said no. I was studying law at the time. I said, no, I want a judgment on this. So I knocked back their generous offer, and I went for the judgment, because I wanted it to go down in the law books, which it did do. And I thought, no, I'm going to see this through to the bitter end. And, I was well aware that I had a very reasonable possibility of having the case thrown out. And the thing, what wasn't taken into consideration during the court case was that I was a prisoner of the state. I was a ward of the state. They had me incarcerated. They did what they did to me. I didn't do it to myself. They were my guardians, and they did that to me. Did everything to me. And then not one word of that.
They gave you, Lily, there was no duty of care whatsoever.
They absolutely never even went to that. They never even, it didn't even come in the judgment that I was a prisoner of the state, right? They blamed everything, the judgment blamed everything on my father and my son's father, and basically painted me as being delusional, that there was a baby racket going on. And that was the judge. And anyway, after my lawyer he started reading it. He said, Lily, he said, I can't read this. He said, I just can't read it to you. It's too dreadful. Anyway, I got some of it, but, that day I'm struggling around Brisbane, the streets of Brisbane, with a whole heap of people following me, because they came to see what happened. And I just felt like, just get me on that plane. Just get me on that plane, because I'm going to go home and hang myself. And I just I can't explain how your whole body felt like it was cut in half and, hang up on the side of a shed for your skin to dry out and for you to rot off. And that's exactly how I felt. And when I got home, it's just like, there was no point in living. But anyway, I didn't have much of a choice. My husband called.
Lily, did you contemplate suicide, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh yes, of course I did. Of course I did. I didn't see any point in living, to be quite honest. But then I thought about all the people that were supporting me and everything else like that, and I thought I didn't have the right to do that to these people. But I sort of went into a bit of a slump, and then I thought what I did was, when I came around a bit, I sent the state a bill for my legal expenses, because for the simple reason, I sent both of them a bill. Anyway, of course they sent back a not very nice letter. Yeah. But I thought, no, bugger them. I'm going to send them a bloody bill, because it cost me $100,000 to get those mongrels into the courthouse after what they did to me. But anyway, I didn't have any choice. I was running an organisation at the time, and we thought, well, I want some justice with all of this. You know, I want some justice. They admitted in my court case that, you know, that they did these things and they got away with it. But anyway, we started, you know, jumping up and down and, you know, calling for a Senate inquiry. Anyway, there was another group running around singing out for a national apology. But every time they put it in the media, we'd come out and say, we're not having an apology unless we know the truth. Because the other groups, like the Forgotten Australians, the kids that were in orphanages and that, and the Stolen Generation had Senate inquiries and inquiries. And we couldn't take an apology without people telling their stories. Anyway, it did get, you know, quite hectic. And we were, you know, we were making, I was a lady. I was a mother. I was driven. It was the Irish.
A little bit. Yeah, the Irish came out on you that day. You told me.
It did.
Yeah.
It
And
did.
I don't blame you.
Yes.
But how did you, like? I want to move on a bit with our time. I want to give you everything, but I give you the opportunity there. But also, then I want to lead in, finish it. But I want to lead into what inspired you, because I've read your book. Not the full amounts, I won't lie on air, but I've read chapters of it, and I think like the audience would listen, talking to you, the way you tell it, I'm fascinated listening to you, like we've had long conversation. But tell us what drives you after everything. You're inspiring, and what inspired you to write a book on top of running your organization, the CEO of Origins Australia? What inspires you to do that? Because most people, I mean this sincerely, a lot of people would have just given up and went into a sheltered, you know, their own bubble.
Well, I started writing the book about 40 odd years ago. And
Yep.
it was even before I started looking for my son and that. And I just like, I wanted to sort of get something together so he would know the story of what happened to us. And, you know, like it was, you know, going back to my childhood and then, you know, what had happened. And then, you know, but I'd stop at different points. And every decade I'd started up again, you know, I'd get the thing to keep going with it. And I got up to quite a few chapters, you know, like, and then I left it alone for quite a long time and you know, do a bit more. But when COVID happened, I was up to coming towards the end of it because it was a story with no end. It just went on and on and on. You know, and I thought, Jesus, when am I going to find
You'll
an
never
end to this
find the
bloody
end.
thing?
You'll be dead before the end's finished. Yeah,
That's
no, I know
right.
what you mean. Yeah. Go ahead,
That's
Lil.
right. And I thought, I've got to get my finger out because it was 10 years after the 10 years after the national apology that we got from the Senate inquiry that jumped up and down about.
Was that
And I
Julie
thought,
Gillard that was the Prime
yes,
Minister?
yeah.
Yes.
We managed to get that inquiry in the long run.
That was
But
great.
it was 10 years after that inquiry and the apology, and it was during COVID. And I'd moved up to Queensland. I couldn't do anything else. I was just, you know, there was no karaoke, there was no clubbing, there was nothing. I thought I better make use of all this spare time that I've got and finish this bloody thing. Anyway, I did get my finger out, and
Yeah.
I had to bring this to an end, right? It was hanging off my back, so I had to bring it to an end, and that's when I finished it. And but it wasn't quite finished because I did the first more or less memoir, and then we got the whole thing. I got rewritten again, and
Yeah.
then I updated it to what's happening more or less today.
Yeah.
So we published the memoir again, and you know, like I actually you know, needed to put in it of how we have been treated after a national apology.
Yep.
And people needed to know that at that time, that there's coming up to 13 years after that apology and the inquiry, about how we never got any justice. And I think, you know, there's by, you know, not so very long ago, Ireland gave an apology. Scotland gave an apology. Wales gave an apology, about all of this. And, there's people screaming for an apology in New Zealand. And they've been trying for, I don't know how long, to get an apology for the 250,000 women like me in England that are still waiting for an apology. And, but, before that happened, I was taken, and a committee was taken to Canberra, and they, to talk to them. And anyway, they offered they offered it to tack us onto the end of the Forgotten Australians apology. And I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. We've got funding, we've got everything we asked for. And they would have, said, oh, yes, well, we gave you an apology, even though we didn't have the right to one because nobody had told their stories. So we knocked that back. We said, no, we're not going to do that. So we had waited for our own. Anyway, we eventually got it. But, and I think in some senses, after what happened to, after the apology they gave for forced adoption and that, it was sort of like, well, okay, well, we did a hell of a lot of work for that. We did most of the submissions and everything else like that. And, and that's, sort of like, I suppose in one sense, did find culpability with the federal government. But the thing was, they ended up giving the funding to people or organisations that were part and parcel of our experience.
Yeah.
And to organisations that, probably weren't as radical as we were. So we were punished in that respect, we couldn't row our own boat. But, and it's still, and I look back, right? I look back and I think from that night in 1967, when they took me into custody as a ward of the state, exposed to moral danger, it was going to be a punishment that put me into a place where I'd be forced to work without pay, and snatch my child off me, give me drugs that have a potential to cause carcinogenic effects, and then, keep control over the information where I could find that stolen child, threaten me with jail, and then
Lily, what was the moral thing that it said that you weren't capable of looking after a child? Is that you're too young? What you just said there?
No, I was over the age of consent.
Okay.
And this was another thing that I discovered when I was studying law. And the age of consent in Queensland was 16, right? And 16 and one day you were over the age of consent. But I was nearly 17. I was 17 and a half by the time I gave birth, and I didn't know that I could have actually walked out of that place. But, I was threatened with being, when I contacted my son when I was in hospital, right? The woman from the department was told that he'd been there, and said that, if I didn't sign, the papers and everything else, because I'd done the wrong thing, that I could be commissioned to a mental asylum out at a place called Kerala House, because I'd done something that I shouldn't have done. Anyway, that was another part of the threat to get me to sign the adoption papers. But that's what they did to the naughty girls, in the asylum. That if you did something wrong, like if you got caught smoking or something, you get it sent out to the psychiatric institution. So if you didn't work in that laundry, then you were out. You were over to a place far worse than what I was in, and that was intended to punish you, as if you would have a jail-like experience, which would be where you would find yourself, for being uncontrollable. So that was always the threat, that if you didn't behave yourself in Holy Cross, you went somewhere very bad.
And if you were sent to a psychiatric, that means they would pill you up, if you want to use that word, medicate you.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what they did. They drugged the girls. They had an inquiry in Queensland in 1997-98 about the abuse of children in these homes, and they had to make it a confidential report for that particular home, and another one for another home run by the Sisters of Mercy. So the place was too evil to even allow people to actually see what was going on, but we knew what was going on because girls would come back to Holy Cross and tell us about what they lived through. But that was the thing, was to break the spirit of these girls so that they become compliant, as if they didn't exist. They were just thrown away, I suppose. And during my court case, they interviewed one of the workers that was working at the if you could call them social workers, that was working at the same time when my social worker was working. And anyway, they said to her, "Now, what do you do with these girls like Lily when they come in?" And she said, "We put them in the too hard basket." And I thought, well, that's a bit ironic, isn't it? That, instead of giving me my baby and let me walk out of the home and marry the father of my child, they put me in the too hard basket, and it's just like a complete contempt for somebody's human rights and their life. That, oh, why didn't they open the door and let me out? I was 17 and a half by then, and you think about it and it's like, wow.
You think about it, Lily, and I was just thinking what you're saying is like, they didn't let you out, but I don't think they had any intentions, because they wouldn't have got you to change your name. Why would you change your name? They get people to change your name. Is that so that there's no comeback of what they're doing and changing? I think I tell you what, it's disgusting, to be honest with you.
They changed your name so that you more or less didn't give anybody in the home your identity, so you couldn't find each other or whatever, and to change your identity into something else. I mean, when I come out of there, and I still get trapped in this dissociation of that incident or that experience, happened to Leanne. It didn't happen to Lily McDonald. I was going back to the place, and sort of, it's a case of where your mind doesn't escape from that reality that, was forced on you with a different identity. So, you're sort of like, you're trying it all my life, right up until the point, I had quite a lot of counselling over the years, trying to fit these bits and pieces of jigsaw puzzles to make sense. And it wasn't until I started looking at, it in a legal way, studying law, that every single subject that I studied, like, could be attributed to my experience, and I thought to myself, this, what they did just about covers every single element of law, criminal law, contract law, medical law, the list goes on and on and on. But, it took a long time for me to sort of, I suppose, get the picture, particularly when my mind was so scrambled for such a long time of trying to wonder how this happened to me. But when I started really looking, I went looking for my son's father. And, I found him again when my son would have turned, I think it was when the laws changed, and I thought I was going to find him. So I thought, I'll go and see if I can contact Steve, right? He could fill the picture in a bit more. Anyway, it was only by accident again that I actually tracked him down, and we got to came up to
Lily's private investigation unit. Yeah.
Now, don't tell anybody what happened.
I won't.
But anyway, I grieved over him all those years. And when I found him, it was like, it was in one sense, and we're a little bit older, but it made me realize that what I'd lost and was punished for, should have never have happened. It was almost like we picked up from that day or that night when I went to bed, and that attraction or that love or whatever you call it was still there. And I've been in contact with him ever since, and he still grieves over what was done to us. Why didn't they leave us alone? Why did they take our child? And it's almost like, I don't know, I can't explain it because it's too painful for words. But people made decisions in my life that affected my whole life till the day I die. That they took away my right to the mother, the child, who was never told he was adopted till he was 23, and you think to yourself, how do you get your head around, that injustice? It doesn't matter how much activism, how much jumping up and down and everything I do, I still don't feel that I would ever get any justice for what they did to me.
Are you?
And I think that
you're getting no closure, Lily, are you?
You never get closure. And, I found that out, like from many mothers over the years, that you die with it on your breath. And, it's how can you get closure when you realize that this crime follows through to every generation that you've lost. He lost every, passage of where his life, came from, and his children bear the name of strangers, and that carries on for till whenever. And you think to yourself, I don't know my grandchildren. I know of them. I don't know my great-grandchildren. I've only met them a couple of times. And now I'm looking at the fourth generation because they're getting to an age where they can get married and have children. I'm looking at the fourth generation of my family that was taken from me and given away to strangers. And you think to yourself, if that doesn't make you hostile or very angry, then there's something wrong with you, that you can take somebody's sense of who they are, where they came from, and everything else like that, and give it to a stranger and say, well, as far as, we're concerned, that's who you are. And when my son woke up at the age of 23 and went to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and was called into the house, his adopted parents said to him, oh, by the way, you're adopted. We don't know who your mother is. So he went off to work that day comfortable in the identity of, who he was and who he believed he was, to suddenly become person non gratis. You're the son of no one. Don't go looking for her because you never know what you'll find. So that was his introduction to whoever, he thought he was and who he really was.
It's like the ripple effect, isn't it, Lily? The ripple effect that runs down to the generation which you're talking about, what you suffered and your partner then losing your son, but that runs down to the ripple effects, everyone within that, what they actually done to you.
Yeah.
And I go back is there was no duty of care to you. And I find it shocking, and I'm sure people are going to be reading your book, Prisoner of the State, and it'll be a #1 seller because you're very honest in the way you tell it. But I just find it, people will find that and they'll speak out. It's hard to believe that they could do that. Those people that did those things, they must have had their lives on. How was their guilt? They should know they did the wrong thing.
Well, they know that they've done the wrong thing, but they justify it by saying, well, it was in my child's best interest, and and every other child's best interest that they took from their mother. But it's such a lie. It's such a deception, because when you look into the research on it, they were doing studies on the effect of a child being taken from its mother at birth, whatever, an infant being removed from its mother. They were doing studies all over the world, hundreds of studies, long before they did what they did to me, back to the 1940s, about the mental health of these children. And they were well aware that the child suffered immeasurably, right? But they still continued to do it. And the thing, like there was the ideology, right, of we can't say this is punishment, but what we can say is it's in the best interest of the child, because if you take the child at birth, it's a blank slate. They can make it, whatever these adopting parents can make it, whatever they put into it. But people will accept it that way. If you say that, if you say it's in the best interest of this child not to be with its mother, then blah blah blah. You can rehabilitate the mother. They'll see it as rehabilitating the mother, but also in the child best interest when they absolutely knew about the mental health effects and all the other issues that went along with it. They knew what was the child was to suffer, and they still did it. And that's the reason why, we cannot allow them to say that, make all sorts of excuses as to the reason why they were stealing our babies before we even put a hand on them or laid an eye on them, and say that was in our child's best interest.
I think they were very nice to you. They let you see your baby for 5 minutes before they swiped it away. Now, come on.
But they only allowed me to see him after I'd signed the consent, not beforehand.
See?
And they only showed me half of his face, so I never saw his whole face. So you just see the side of a baby, where you can't even make him out or have a physical reminder of him or memory of him. They even take that away from you. But I mean, I was under the influence of drugs that they were giving me anyway.
Yeah.
So, you've got fragmented memories of a whole lot of things that were happening. Same as all the other women, drugged up with barbiturates and everything else like that.
They filled them up with it. Lily, we're out of time. I could talk to you for 5 hours. And I know that people are going to love listening to you. You're amazing. And I put up your details there at the front of the screen on the description and your full bio. And I know your book, and we see it up there at the end of the show as we did the start, Prisoner of the State. And I'll tell you what, now where can we buy that for the audience?
Well, you can buy it at most bookshops and the airports and whatever. But we've also got a beautiful podcast of Mothers Like Me stories. It's called Somebody's Daughter. And you can hear lots of stories of mothers and adoptees, right? You can hear their stories, and we've all got a different story, but we all have the same outcome. So but if you can't think that that we're all the same, but we all had a different experience, which and it's quite horrific actually when you listen to what other women went through.
And what did you say the website?
Anyway,
somebody's daughter.
Somebody's daughters. They've only just got to Google it.
Is it?
And they'll come across not only my episode but the episodes of other mothers, and we've actually got another couple of Magdalen babies in our committee that were mothers were in that home. So it's almost like I'm giving them an experience of what I went through, and that tells them what their mothers went through.
And what we'll do is we'll put the connection of all of those on the front of this podcast, so people can click in, and also where to buy your amazing book. Now, just before we finish off, I want to make a little bit of a statement and say that you're an amazing woman. I have had the privilege of talking. You're honest, and you're helping other people by what you're doing, by speaking out what you're doing, and I hope that you'll get the full justice. But I think by your book, it's going to educate a lot of people, as in to be able to speak out like you do. You're an empowering woman, and I just want to ask you to finish off the show, and for other people, just give a little bit of advice, for people all over the world on what you've gone through. A little bit of advice, especially for women.
Well, I think, my daddy left me with a few words, and he used to say to me, and the other 8 of us, never bow down before any man, right? And I think that, that stuck with me. And the thing at the end of the day is, don't allow people to snatch away your life. Don't allow people to intimidate you, take that power away from you. Because at the end of the day, you don't realize how much power you have within yourself when something so sacred has been taken away from you. And I think my advice would be, stand up for yourself. If you don't stand up for yourself now, you probably never will. And you can't live a life on your knees. And I got up off my knees and I fought for my child. And I would fight for any of my family, because nobody had any rights to take that away from me. I'm the mother of a son that will never bear my name. So that was more or less the end, of my proud Irish heritage in the long run. And that kept me going as well.
Well, Lily, all I can say is I'm proud to know you. And I say,
thank you.
Keep up the good work. And thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll stay in touch, and you can look at all the details for Lily's book, and please get a copy if you want to sit down. But you've got a good taste of it by Lily talking today. Lily, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marty, and thank you for spending such lovely, memorable time with me.
Absolute, my pleasure. And thank you to our listeners here in Australia and all over the world. And go to watch life stories on moralinjuryinternational.com, our main channel. And you can see it on YouTube. We leave all the details up, and you can connect more with Lily and listen to it. Lily, good night from Australia.
Good night,
both of us.
Marty. You're a devil of a man, Marty.
Absolutely. You can read me well. Good night, my friends, before she says any more.